What's up, everybody? Tim Anderson here, aka Renfell, the bearded dwarven princess, in all of her early morning glory. Because, as you know, dwarves get up early, and dwarven princesses are always beautiful, no matter what time of the day it is. But I digress. Welcome back to the latest Rings of Power rant video. Today, we're going to be discussing toxicity in the fan base, and is it toxic to criticize casting decisions and criticize adaptation choices? Is that really toxicity, or is that just legitimate concern over how decisions are being made? And what's the difference between legitimate criticism and full-blown racism, like what we're seeing with the Star Wars fan base and the actress Moses Ingram, who is kicking ass in her role as Reva the Sith Inquisitor? So tasty. I'm loving Obi-Wan, but that's another show. I do other videos about that, so I digress. Let's get back to the topic at hand, which is racism, toxicity, so on and so forth, with Rings of Power. Now, this is a complex topic and it's going to be a trigger point for a lot of people. I fully understand that, but hopefully you can get through that to have a legitimate conversation here. Because as everyone knows from my previous rant videos, even though I am poking fun at Rings of Power and these are somewhat ranty, it's also, I hope, a greater chance to have conversations about the show and Middle Earth and so on and so forth. Because at the end of the day, even though a lot of us who are true Tolkien fans have concerns about the Rings of Power show, we also understand that it is bringing greater visibility to Tolkien's works as a whole, and that's never a bad thing. Never, ever, ever is that a bad thing. It's not. So, with that being said, this is a conversation that's sort of been simmering in my mind for a while now, and it's come up in the past because we've talked on it briefly in some previous episodes when we've been discussing sort of the reaction to the casting decisions that Amazon has made for some of their characters. Specifically, we're talking about the actress who is playing the character of Princess Dis. We have Sofia Nomvete, who is a black woman playing that character, and then the character of Arondir being played by Ismael Cruz Cordova. Both of these decisions caused concern, including by myself. Now, I've said on the record many times that my concern has nothing to do with the skin color of those actors. I believe any actor of any skin color should be able to play any part. That has nothing to do with it. My reaction was always one, first and foremost, for Princess Dis. She doesn't have a beard. Dwarven princesses have beards. Point in case, ladies and gentlemen. But the other one was Arondir, first and foremost because he's an invented character, and they're totally playing around with gender swapping the Baron and Luthien story, and that caused a gut reaction for me because Baron and Luthien is obviously Tolkien and his wife, and that's mythology you don't mess around with. So the fact that they went out there and did that made me a little cringe a little bit. But then the fact that they gender swapped the characters was another gut sucker punch to the gut, and then they took a character, an elven character, and traditionally in Tolkien's works, the elves are always light skinned. We do have some dark haired elves, but they're always light skinned, ethereal creatures, and we have a dark skinned actor playing an elf. Now, I probably wouldn't have been okay with it, and I think most Tolkien fans would have been absolutely okay with any casting decisions made for the show had the executive producer not come out and said, and this is Lindsay Weber, it only felt natural to us that an adaptation of J.R.R. Tolkien's work would reflect what the world actually looks like. This following on the heels of discussions that had been had in recent months and recent years that Tolkien's work was problematic because he was writing from the perspective of a white male in a time when we didn't have as much diversity in the world. And Tolkien, being a devout Catholic, would have been against homosexuals and so on and so forth. And I've seen criticism in the past where people have said that, Tolkien would have never accepted Ian McKellen in the role of Gandalf because Ian McKellen is an openly gay man, a beautiful, sexy, openly gay man. Ian McKellen might be an older gentleman, and I might be a straight white guy. Well, technically, I'm a bearded dwarven princess as well. But Ian McKellen, you sir, you were the perfect Gandalf. But I've seen people have that criticism before because they said Tolkien would have said this or would have thought this or would have been against this. We don't know that. That's people taking their own political agendas and putting them onto this writer. And in the same way, we have people who have put their own political agendas onto the works of Tolkien and have said, well, Tolkien didn't have any colored people in his works, and he didn't have any uh, LGBTQ plus people in his books. Therefore, we have to modernize that because we need the current adaptation to represent the way the world actually is. My takeaway from the criticism has not been that the Tolkien fan base is inherently racist or inherently homophobic or anything like that. It's that we have legitimate concerns about the forced diversity and forced wokeness being injected into the show by the showrunners, who apparently have the viewpoint that Tolkien's works need to be adapted and updated to reflect modern viewpoints as opposed to the viewpoints of where the world was when he wrote it. But if you go back and dig into who Tolkien was and what he was building with The Lord of the Rings, we understand that he was building an Anglo-Saxon mythology here, and that is a predominantly white part of the world. And there's nothing wrong with that, just as much as there's nothing wrong with the Wakanda legacy and that being an African mythology with black people. Nothing wrong with that. The difference between real diversity and forced diversity would be something like if you've never seen Sense8, which is an amazing Netflix show that got canceled way too early. It was written by the Wachowskis, also by J. Michael Straczynski, who was on board for that. But the Wachowskis obviously went through a very personal journey where they were both men when they wrote and directed the Matrix movies, and then over the years they both transitioned to women. Cloud Atlas is an amazing film, by the way, if you've never watched that. But by the time they got to Sense8, they had both fully transitioned, and that was a very personal tale that included an entirely diverse cast of LGBTQ plus people, and it was a brilliant, phenomenal series. If you've never watched it, I highly recommend you take the time to go watch Sense8. It's really cool science fiction with a really cool cast of brilliant actors, fully representing the spectrum of today's diverse workplace, right? And diverse world that we live in. And that's diversity working in the right way because it's not forced. It wasn't done to fulfill a political agenda. It was done to represent the worldview of the writers and directors and to tell a very personal story on screen. That's not the case when we have a showrunner coming out and saying, the reason we chose to cast these actors in these roles is because we are modernizing the story of Middle Earth. We're modernizing Middle Earth to represent the world that we currently live in and what the world actually looks like. And that's dangerous territory because what does the world actually look like? That kind of depends on your point of view because everyone has a different viewpoint of what the world actually looks like. And that's the danger of injecting political viewpoints into any sort of project. So the criticisms that I've seen against the casting choices have not been racist, I feel. I haven't seen any racism against the actress playing Princess Dis, Sofia Nombete. I've not seen racism against her the same way as I've seen racism against the character of Riva that Moses Ingram is playing for Star Wars. And I don't get where that's coming from because she's doing a great job, and there's no lore anywhere that says you can't have a black woman playing the part of a Sith Inquisitor. Equally so, there's not any lore that says that you can't have a black woman portraying a dwarf. It's just that in previous versions, we've only ever seen white dwarves or white elves. And considering that Tolkien himself said he was building an Anglo-Saxon mythology, it would make sense that those characters would be white. So again, I think if the showrunners would have never said anything, and if they just would have said, "Here's the new characters, here's the people who are playing these characters," I think some people would have said, "Oh my God, you can't have a black elf." But I think the reaction, I probably personally, if they would have never made the statement that we're modernizing Tolkien to fit the modern world, I never would have had a reaction. I would have just been like, "Cool, no big deal." Like I never would have had a reaction, but because they made the statement that they made and they made a political statement, my reaction to that has been to say, that's not right. Like you shouldn't be doing that, and therefore I am criticizing some of the creative decisions being made on the show. That does not make me toxic, and it does not make other people toxic who are criticizing or worried about those types of changes being injected into the show because it feels like they're being injected for the sake of making a statement as opposed to being done for the purpose of making the story better. I don't know. I would love to hear your comments below. Obviously, this is something that's part of a greater conversation. Before we get to that greater conversation, this is the part where I'd like to say, hey, if you like what you've seen so far today, I would love it if you would like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so that you can continue to get updates like this in the future. I do a lot of Rings of Power stuff. I also have the Mondays in Middle Earth series every Monday morning at 11 a.m. as I'm reading through the entirety of the Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion in preparation for the Rings of Power so that I could better critique the show with more up-to-date viewpoints, because the last time I read those books was 20 years ago when I was a 19, 20-year-old kid. Now I'm 42. The internet's a lot different these days. You can also support the channel here if you like what you hear and you want to support me as a content creator. Buy a super thanks on the video. Buy me a cup of coffee, donate whatever you'd like. You can also join as a member of the Adventurers Guild down below. And if you want to go above and beyond, we do have a Patreon page for the World of the Weave and the Void, which is that world map beyond. It's my brother, my wife, and I building a whole new world. You can check it out, patreon.com/wandering hermits. But now let's get back to the rest of this video. There's this interesting article over at movieweb.com, and I'm going to have it linked down below, where it says there's a quote here. It says, fans have a notoriously difficult time separating the artist from the art. Perhaps the biggest place we see this is in casting. As fans immerse themselves in the world of their beloved fictions, the discernible lines between actor and role blurs, and the person cast is correlated with the fictional character. This is where I think people are projecting their own racism onto casting decisions, which is not fair and it's not legitimate criticism of an adaptation. If you're upset that a black person was cast just because it's a black person, or that you're upset that, for example, that's just it would never be because Tolkien didn't believe that look at this, he had the black people over here and the white people over here and everything else. You've got problems. You need to reset your worldview. You need to step away from that and say, hang on a minute, why am I feeling that way? Have I been programmed to think that? Because we shouldn't be upset that an actor of a certain role or of a certain sexuality, of a certain viewpoint, the actor needs to be separate. Their political views, their religious views, their sexual orientation it has nothing to do with their portrayal of that character. And so it's not the fault of the actor for being cast in these roles. So any criticisms that we have, whether it's those of us who are here with the Middle Earth fan base, or those of us who are also fans of Star Trek and Star Wars, we need to be able to separate that, because if you can't separate that, then you do have issues with racism. I would also love to point out the fact that Anson Mount, who is an amazing actor, and I loved him on Hell on Wheels and everything else, came out recently in support of Moses Ingram and said, hey, I've worked with an amazing cast of LGBTQ plus people on Star Trek Discovery and in Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and we fully support Moses Ingram as an actress because she is a badass doing what she was paid to do to represent this role. And the same can be said of Sofia Novete. Hopefully I'm not butchering the pronunciation of her name, playing the dwarf Disa, and Ismael Cruz Cordova, who's playing the elven character of Arendir. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right as well. These are casting decisions, and my ultimate complaint comes down to the fact that the casting decisions are being done from a place of a political wokeness as opposed to let's make the story better by doing this, that, or the other. And that's where I think we have legitimate concerns from fans, which is not the same thing as toxicity. So when you have the showrunners or articles out there coming out and saying the only people who are upset about this are the straight white males, that's not a fair reaction to the criticism. That's, again, people projecting their own interpretation of the reactions onto the fan base. There are some people who are legitimately feeling that way, who are like, oh, it's just I can't handle a black woman in that role, and there can't be gay people because Tolkien was against gays, and so on and so forth. There are those people, but I feel like those are few and far between compared to the vast majority of Tolkien fans who are just up in arms because we see our beloved franchise being adapted in a way that doesn't feel the most respectful. And again, none of us are going to know for sure until the show is actually out, but we can absolutely sit here and rant about it and poke fun at it and you know, nitpick if we'd like. until we actually see the show. And it could very well be that at the end of the day, when we see the show come out this fall, people like myself will eat crow and say, damn, that was actually really good. But until that point in time, I'm going to continue to be very critic. I'm going to be very yeah, I'm going to continue to criticize. It is what it is. I'm not seeing a lot of good things. I don't think I've seen anything really positive out of the stuff that I've seen so far. And so I'm really just kind of standing back and going, what are you guys doing? You could have just launched everything and not made all these statements and we would have been fine with it. But instead you had to make it political and you had to make it these things and now you're getting the reaction that you're getting and it's kind of your own fault. So, love to hear your thoughts. Drop them down in the comments below. Like, subscribe, follow along, support with the super thanks, and of course, don't forget you can always join a member of the Adventurers Guild. I stream every single day. Hopefully, we'll see you in Discord and in the next video. Until then, friends,